Hysterical hysteria.
It's such a magical hysteria.
Welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. Okay, as per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, commented and liked and all that kind of stuff. And also, a big thank you to you guys that contacted me and purchased or gave me an order for one of the bottlings that I reviewed last week. Again, your support is very much appreciated, and even more so during these difficult times. Obviously, so I'll be putting in I have put in an order with Morrison & Mackay. So hopefully next week I should be able to dispatch those orders. So yeah, a really big thank you. Anyway, on to this week's episode of the show. I decided, I think I've done enough of the hard sell, shall we say. So this week's episode of the show is for entertainment purposes only. And as you can see from the title page, we're looking at Ben Nevis. And I don't think I've actually ever done an episode of the show on Ben Nevis. And obviously I don't have any direct dealings with the distillery itself and their Japanese owners, so it's I found a load of, again, I was box digging, and a number of these samples are quite old, and but I thought it's long overdue. I really like Ben Nevis. I mean, it has that sort of classically doughy, bready, malty kind of character, which is built up on what I would call traditional. It's very old. I think it's a very old school style distillery. Short fermentation, I think about 48 hours. Wooden washbacks, slow distillation, and you get. Again, you get sort of like a really quite balanced spirit. It's got plenty of body, it's got plenty of maltiness and breadiness, like I said, but it has an element of finesse as well. Although, as you well know, the distillery likes to use a lot of sherry casks, and that has resulted in a few sulphurous bottlings in the past from memory. But like I said, it comes across as very much a very traditional style of distillery, and then something odd kind of happens. It's one of those sort of weird kind of quirky things that sort of these Scottish distilleries sometimes have to do, and then they start sort of playing around with weird cask types. So you get white port, ruby port, you get and it's sort of like, hang on, this is not kind of quite what I'm expecting. And they're also not the most they don't seem to be the most kind of what's the word, well, basically their inventory skills seem to be pretty poor. I mean, it was the classic example was a bottling called the Forgotten Bottling, which was I think it was about 700 odd bottles that had been bottled at some stage, stuck into boxes and just kind of forgotten about. I mean, how do you just forget about these sort of things? I mean, yes, I guess distilleries change ownership and that kind of thing, and you have several warehouses full of casks, and if your documentation isn't particularly great to start off with, casks can kind of get lost, and the master distiller is sort of rummaging around in one of the warehouses and goes, "Oh my God, what the hell is that? I didn't realise we had some of that," And anyway, so some of the samples of the distillery releases I received in 2013, would you believe it? So yeah, they've been sat around for a long time. I don't even remember how I came about them. I don't know whether it was a distillery rep that came along or what have you. But I mean, again, that kind of sort of slightly, weird way of working was kind of in the labelling. It's just written sort of 15-year-old cask strength, no ABV, no sort of distillation date, no bottling date, and I'm kind of having to sort of do a bit of rummaging around and a bit of research to find out just exactly what the hell that is, and but at the end of the it's part of the fun of the whiskey industry. You know, if everybody was sort of like, you know, really kind of on point, it would be a touch boring, it has to be said. But you know, like I said, I mean, I've always liked Ben Nevis, you know, Salford sherry casks aside, and you know, I would say it's sort of, you know, it's a good average distillery. I mean, it produces some you know, interesting bottlings, and hopefully, you know, I've got a few of them here, you know, and I've obviously thrown in a few independent bottlings as well to give you guys a kind of flavour of the Ben Nevis character. So anyway, I guess that's probably that enough waffle. Let's take a look at today's lineup then. Okay, so like I was saying, this is kind of like a bit of another one of those classic from the archives tasting, and we're going to kick off with the Douglas McGibbon, and label doesn't exist anymore. A Douglas McGibbon Provenance bottling of an 8-year-old Ben Nevis. This was a refill bourbon hoggy. It was distilled in June of 2006, bottled in July of 2014, and the cask code was DMG 10328, and obviously bottled at 46%. Going even further back, this baby that I found in a drawer. This is a Duncan Taylor NC2 Ben Nevis from 1995, bottled in 2009. Would you believe? It's a single cask. I mean, obviously the NC2 range has been long since discontinued, and so this was rum finished as far as I'm aware, certainly bourbon rum, single cask, 916. So I'm guessing that it was Duncan Taylor that basically originally had the bourbon cask and then decided to finish it in a rum cask. So yeah, that's going to be quite interesting, and nice colour to it as well. Then we're going to move on to the first of the 3 distillery releases. This is, like I said, this is a 15-year-old single cask bottling. It's a first fill sherry butt number 586. It was distilled in June of 1998, bottled in October of 2013, and bottled at 56.1%. So could be interesting. Now we're going to look at a couple of the weirder bottlings that the distillery have released. This is a 10-year-old white port cask, number 334. It was a 10-year-old. It was distilled in 2002, bottled in 2012, and bottled at 56.4%. So I can't think of too many other sort of white port wholly matured whiskies. You know, it's certainly not a cask type that you come across very often, so I think that's going to be really intriguing. And then we're on to a 21-year-old ruby port finish. This was distilled in November of 1990, bottled in 2011. It spent its first 13 years in refill hoggies, and then 8 years in export pipes, and it was bottled at 59.8%. So that's a pretty good ABV for a 21-year-old, it has to be said. Haven't got a huge amount left in the bottle, so I may not be able to put a little drop of water with it. And the last one is a real old bottling, as in age and when it was bottled. So this is a Douglas Laing Old Malt Cask Ben Nevis, distilled in June of 1996, bottled in February of 2013. It is 46 years old. Single bourbon cask, reference DL9511, bottled at 43.1, and in actual fact it is this bottle which is out of my collection in actual fact, so it shows you how much I actually thought of that particular bottle. And it's interesting to note, I mean, look at the colour of that. I mean, that is really, really dark, but then the sample doesn't quite sort of show up as dark as the bottle itself. But yeah, that's I guess something to do with light refraction and all that kind of stuff, I imagine. But then I'm not a scientist, I just taste whiskey for a living, so I couldn't tell you for definite why that is. But anyway, there you go. So that's this week's lineup. Let's kick off with the young one. Right, okay, so this is the Douglas McGibbon Provenance, 8 years old. Let's see what nose gives us on this end, shall we? Herbal, quite fruity. There's a distinct off the still, not faintiness, oiliness. There's some gristy barley, there's some sweet barley. A little bit of baked fruit as well there. It's got that slight sort of bready, malty, baked kind of character. It's an interesting nose because on the one hand, you know, you've got that kind of baked character which would seem to imply sort of oxidative characteristics, would imply maturity, and then you have that sort of off the still kind of note, which obviously is the youthfulness of the spirit. And so I wouldn't quite, it's not a schizophrenic nose because it doesn't sort of like hit you with one thing and another. It's actually really well balanced in actual fact, and it's an intriguing nose. It's got a freshness, but it's also got that sort of what feels like a maturity beyond its 8 years of age. So let's see what the part's like. It definitely tastes a lot younger. It tastes more like an 8-year-old. Actually, it tastes younger than that. It's certainly got that off the still kind of character. But again, it shows off the distillery style absolutely perfectly. It's malty, it's slightly bready, it's got a richness to it. There's a little bit of toffee, there's a little herbal note as well. It's not amazingly long, it's relatively short, and that's more down to its youth rather than any encroaching oak. And the oak is actually not particularly that noticeable. Again, it's kind of sitting in the background, it's adding sort of structure to the whiskey. And you know, I mean, I don't think that would have been particularly expensive back in that day, back in sort of 2014. And I think it gives a really good insight into the character of Ben Nevis. So nice one to start with. Right, okay, so let's move on to the NC2. So this is probably rum finish. I don't think it's wholly rum matured, but we shall see what those gives us. Bold, bready, plenty of distillery character, but it's got that sort of slightly Guyana-esque, oily, rummy dried fruits. There's a little bit of citrus. There's a bit of spice, a bit of shortbread. It's a big nose. It's butch. It's not sort of light in the feet, shall we say. But it's balanced again. I mean, it is an absolutely gorgeous nose. The rum finishing is just about right. I mean, yes, it's noticeable, but it's not overwhelming the character of the spirit. And I suppose this is the thing with Ben Nevis. What isn't obviously, well, it's not relatively apparent. It is a dense malt. You know, it's got plenty of character. It's got plenty of substance, shall we say? So, you know, you would have thought, okay, so it's going to have the cojones to take on sort of various casks, which is obviously why they like to use a lot of sherry. But like with a lot of these distilleries that tend to use sherry, having that kind of style of whiskey does tend to end up more in the industrial end of the spectrum. But this certainly doesn't. This is a very, very nice whiskey, it has to be said. And the sample has held up amazingly well, considering, well, that's what, 11 years old this dribble has been left in the bottle. Oh. Anyway, see what those like. Oh, that's a hell of a finish. Big, malty, very much like the nose, kicks off with the distillery character, slight oxidised apple note. Rum starts coming in on the mid palate. You're getting that sort of slightly oily, slightly Guyana-y, slight agricole, dried fruits. There's a a lovely rummy sweetness to the palate, but again it's balanced more by the spices than any sort of citric kind of character, although it does have a little citric note there. The aftertaste is a touch dry, I will give it that. I mean, that's possibly a bit of tannin and a little bit of alcohol kind of combining there just to make the finish a little bit on the dry side. But in actual fact, I think that kind of works quite nicely because the malt itself is quite dense and rich. The rum is adding that sort of, you know, lip smacking sweetness. So you want a bit of balance right on the end, and you know, a little bit of dryness, a little bit of tannin. It's in actual fact, I think, sort of working really well in the context of this particular whisky. So yeah, really nice progression. Shame you can't buy it anymore. Okay, so on to the first fill sherry cask strength 15-year-old. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's nice. That's got a lovely sort of Armagnac-y, sort of sub-Armagnac-y, not quite as dark as an Armagnac kind of character. We've got barley, we've got mature tropical fruit, apricot, kiwi, melon. Oh, I mean, you know, first fill sherry, but you'd expect that to be absolutely blasted. But wow, I mean, that has stood up amazingly well. There's a little creaminess, there's a little coffee, there's some touch of tannin as well. I mean, and the alcohol is pretty well contained, it has to be said. I don't think this would need any water. I'll try and keep a little bit to put a little drop of water to see what happens, but oh, that's got some maturity. That smells a lot older than 15, it has to be said. Oh, that's my kind of sherry butt, it has to be said. See what it passes like. More sherry on the palate, it has to be said. It's more that coffee, a little bit more tannin. But again, on the mid palate, I'm getting that wonderful, mature, slightly tropical fruit, apricot and unsweetened pineapple. And again, then the sherry moves back in again. I'm getting more coffee, more wood notes, more tannin. Again, like I said, I mean, the spices are really buzzy on the aftertaste as well. I don't think that really needed any water at all. I mean, the alcohol is just enhancing that wonderful spiciness. It's big, it's broad, it's juicy, it's malty. It just encapsulates Ben Nevis and how well Ben Nevis handles a sherry cask. And I don't think I'm going to bother putting any water with it because I forgot to fill my butt. Yeah, let's move on. It didn't need any water anyway, to be honest with you.
It's just one way street.
Right, okay, so let's move on to the 10-year-old white port matured. Now, I've probably done this in the wrong order. I probably should have done this one before the sherry cask, but oh well, you know, these things kind of happen. So I'll just have to. What do they say in Norfolk? I'll keep a trashing on, boy. Anyway, so yes, I shall keep a trashing on. Let's see what the nose gives us. That's really quite unusual. Barley, straw, oxidised white grape, slight nuttiness, apricot, again malty, a little bit of breadiness. It's again robust, it's full, it's distinctly Ben Nevis. It's unusual. I mean, if I was tasting this blind, I might not have, I probably wouldn't have guessed it for a white port cask. It's certainly got possibly white winey kind of notes, which might have led me into that. It's certainly not got the sort of honeyed sweetness of a Sauterne, or the sort of the biscuitiness maybe of say Madeira, but has really intriguing, it has to be said. Now I haven't got a clue what it originally retailed for. and I haven't got a clue what, if you want to try and find it now, how many hundreds it's going to cost you, but that's a bloody good nose. Let's see what the palate's like. Quite woody, earthy, grippy, odd violety note right on the finish, which is, you know, bit of oxidised grape, bit of breadiness, little short, bit of a citrus twang, bit of almost kind of marzipan, yeah, a bit of almond, a little bit of granulated sugar as well. I mean, that is a really intriguing palate. Again, totally blemish free, little on the short side, but you know, that's really quite intriguing. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 21-year-old ruby port finish. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, that's a bit of a stinky nose, but you know, stinky in a good way. It's a kind of, it has a bit of a roughness to it, in a bit like sort of a kind of a sherried Springbank roughness, not an unpleasant roughness, a kind of natural roughness, shall we say. Plenty of porty notes, damson, blackcurrant, cherry, manure, damp straw. But again, beneath that, I'm certainly getting the Ben Nevis character. I mean, it certainly helps having tasted the spirit in American oak to kind of get a benchmark and a grip on the distillery character, and you can pick it up here. There's a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of sweeter cherry coming out now, almost kind of glacé cherry, a little vanilla, a little pepper, a little bit of sweet pepper spice. I mean, given as it's had a bit of time in the glass, it is certainly showing a little bit more balance than when I first put my nose in it and just got a big hit of port. It's settling down to show a little bit more nuance now. It's still, like I said, a bit rough and ready, and it kind of just kind of seems to sum up, you know, the sort of, you know, traditional character of Ben Nevis. God, that's gorgeous. That really is impressive. So we'll pass on. My God, that's dry. The moisture is being sucked out of my mouth. I mean, that is tannic. But oh, that finish is starting, yeah, quite juicy in actual fact. The porty fruits are kind of coming back on the finish, getting a little bit of dark chocolate, a little bit of spice, dried black fruit, cherry, currant. But whoa, my God, that's bitter as well. Bitter, intense, tannic. I mean, that's a real wakey malt, it has to be said. I mean, that's not mucking about here, you know. That's kind of and it's just about balanced in actual fact. I mean, like I said, I mean, you know, you just get hit with this wave of tannin and dark chocolate and bitterness, and then the port kind of comes through on the finish. I mean, maybe there's not quite so much distillery character. It's got more of the robust kind of feel of Ben Nevis, but oh, that's impressive. I mean, that is one hell of a whiskey, it has to be said.
I gotta know tonight.
Right, okay, and finally on to the 46-year-old. Let's see what those gives us on this end, shall we? Oh, sorry about that. Just had to have a moment, and that's when Harry met Sally kind of moment, certainly. Yeah, it's stunning. I mean, the depth is unbelievable, mature, rum-like, dried fruits, pepper. It's got that sort of old, dusty leather spices, almost like an old grain whiskey. There's a bit of camphor, macadamia nut, malt, oh, dark toffee, treacle. There's even a bit of, like I said, it's got a campery kind of herbally character. I mean, oh, wow. I mean, stunning, absolutely stunning. I mean, spiciness on that as well. And considering this little dribble has lasted for 7 years, I mean, it just goes to show how intense the character of Ben Nevis is, that it will, you know, withstand, you know, this little dribble being left in the bottle for, you know, that length of time. I mean, it's stunning. I mean, absolutely stunning. I mean, it's just wonderfully mature, wonderful bourbony matured. It's just got so much character. God, I could just keep smelling this for absolutely ages, but I'm going to taste it now. That is just sublime. That is so easy to drink. I mean, that is just so soft, so succulent. I mean, there's a lot of character there. I mean, it kicks off with sort of almost kind of rum and raisin-y kind of character. There's some dark chocolate, there's some malt, treacle, a little bit of crumbly, earthy spice, a little bit of sweet spice, a touch of camphor, some herbs, leather, walnuts, malt, touch of violet actually on the aftertaste, and the length is just absolutely sublime. And I have a bottle. Yes, I'll probably open that on my deathbed, I suppose, and go out in a blaze of glory. I think. Stunning, lost for words. I mean, you know, if you can ever get your hands on some old American oak aged Ben Nevis, and if it's as good as that, then my God, you're in for a treat. So. Right, okay, so that's on today's episode of the show. Like I said, for entertainment purposes only, certainly my entertainment purposes, it has to be said. I mean, this is a definite from the archives tasting, but, you know, I think it has kind of shown pretty much the character of Ben Nevis, and when Ben Nevis is good, Ben Nevis is good. So, the Douglas McGibbon, yeah, it's a bit young, it's a bit oily, a bit off the stilly, but, you know, it displayed, you know, absolutely wonderfully the character of the spirit. American oak, and yeah, it had that breadiness and it had that depth and that sort of, you know, weight to it, and it was just absolutely perfectly balanced. Slightly young Ben Nevis. The NC2 bottling, yeah, again, really nicely balanced. Just about enough of the rum character to kind of add nuance rather than swamping the actual bottle itself or the spirit itself. And yeah, it just goes to show that sort of back in the day and continuing that, you know, that Duncan Taylor are bottling some really good casks. So so yeah, good whiskey. The 15-year-old single cask. Well, I mean, you know me, and you know me and sherry butts, and well, that was a damn good sherried whiskey, and that's basically what I want from a sherried whiskey. I want balance, whether it's a finish or whatever. You know, I want to taste something other than the previous, you know, inhabitant of the cask, and this just had it in absolute spades. Yes, it's because the distillery character had the cojones to kind of stand up to the sherry cask, but even so, you know, that was really quite impressive. The white port matured, really intriguing, really interesting, and like I said, you know, you just don't see very many, you know, white port matured whiskies at all. So it's really intriguing. I don't know whether they're continuing to do these releases. I must admit I haven't had a look. In actual fact, to be honest with you, I mean, I can't even get hold of the 10-year-old these days. I mean, I've given up trying to get hold of the 10-year-old from our wholesalers. They never seem to have it in stock. You know, there's always a supply issue, and that just sums up Ben Nevis to a T. Completely and utterly, well, I won't quite go and say hopeless. Maybe obviously their distilling ability is absolutely spot on, but their logistics seem to be a bit of a bloody mess. It has to be said. And the 21-year-old Ruby Port Finish, well, again, an absolutely gorgeous whiskey. Tannic, dry, suck the moisture completely out of my mouth, but intensity off the scale. I mean, really very, very impressive. And the 46-year-old OMC bottling, well, you don't see bottlings quite like that anymore, and I'm certain that if Hunter Laing were going to sort of release a bottling of that ilk. Obviously, this particular one dates back to the time when it was all a single company, and if they were going to bottle something like that, it would be in one of the sort of the top ranges. It would be. It wouldn't be an OMC bottling these days. I can tell you that for a start. And it was only 7 years ago, but when they know that they've got casks of this kind of quality, they're not going to go into OMC. They're going to go into sort of like the high-end bottlings that they do. But like I said, back in the day. Anyway, there you go. So that's this week's episode of the show in the bag. I hope you've enjoyed it. Like I said, it's another one of those from the archives tastings, and well, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So anyway, no idea what's going to be happening next week. No idea what's going to be happening in the next 5 minutes. Well, yeah, I do actually know. I'm going to be editing this video and removing the cock-up bits. So anyway, until next week, good afternoon and good dramming. I'm guessing possibly a Fino cask. Difficult really to tell. It's certainly not got that sort of well, it would be a Fino, wouldn't it, really, at the end of the day, the white port. What am I talking about? Fino, that's a sherry, you idiot. It's a white port.